Okay, Jack, we're live.
Welcome to the New Bedford Light Chat. This is Jack Spillane, and tonight my guest is Bristol County Sheriff Paul Heroux. Sheriff Heroux has been in office for just over 100 days, maybe 110 at this point, 115. And he's made some big changes to the way that the House of Correction operates already. Welcome to the chat, Sheriff.
Hey, Jack, thanks for having me back on.
So we'll start out with the big event of recent weeks. About 2 weeks ago tomorrow, or Friday, we had a disturbance at the Bristol County House of Correction involving 2 units. And I think if I'm correct, about 130 total inmates that was put down without injury to either corrections officers or inmates. What are your thoughts on that 2 weeks out?
Yeah, so I'm still in the process of doing the after action review. There's a number of things that I would have liked to have done differently. The outcome was the best possible outcome. Nobody was hurt, and the damage that was done to the housing unit was done all within probably the first hour. But it was there was 2 housing units, just for review for the audience. We had one housing unit with 75 inmates and another one with 63 inmates. The housing unit with 63 inmates only had 3 agitators. The 75 housing unit, that one had 17 agitators. All of them were awaiting trial, but some of the characteristics were that 75% were recidivists. 3 of them, out of the 3 of the 20 were awaiting trial for multiple murder charges. 9 were awaiting trial for assault. 3 of them for weapons charges, 1 fentanyl trafficking. So it was a pretty rough group to begin with, but they basically just didn't want to change their housing unit. And, we were moving things around to accommodate some of the changes that need to happen to make it more suicide resistant and to make it safer by putting toilets and cells and locks on doors. But this particular housing unit decided to erupt.
So overall, you mentioned that you're doing a review to see things that you could have done better. It seemed to me that it was overall you had made a point that you waited until you had an overwhelming force to put down and did not rush in early on with dogs, as some said you should have. Would you say overall that you are satisfied? Have you identified areas to improve yet?
Yeah, I'm happy but not satisfied. And, so there's always room for improvement. I think the way I handled this was a little bit atypical. I've spoken with other sheriffs, and there are other sheriffs who have said, yeah, you take back that housing unit, you do it right away, you bring the dogs in, you don't take that type of, resistance from inmates. You just don't do it. You have to show them who's boss. And that's true. That is one way of doing it. In the 2 prior incidents that we've had at the Bristol County office, the jail, in both situations, when the housing unit was the goal, to take that back as soon as possible, people get hurt. People end up in the hospital, inmates and correctional officers. My goal was to make sure, first of all, make sure nobody got hurt, and then to take back the housing unit. So if we had gone in with the first couple of hours, if we had just gone in, first of all, we didn't finish even trying to negotiate with the inmates. Some might say you don't have to. I tried to do that to avoid injuries. But if we had gone in those first couple of hours with the existing staff that we had, people would have gotten hurt. It would have been 20 of our staff going up against 75 of them. We have the equipment, we have the training, we could have taken it back, but it would have come at people getting injured. So instead, what I wanted an overwhelming show of force. I wanted to basically have it so that when the inmates saw what was about to come at them, which was over 120 correctional staff, security staff, they basically said, we're just going to give up, because they were well outnumbered. And basically it was probably the best possible outcome.
Okay. Are you prepared to say yet what areas you might do differently next time?
Oh, yeah, certainly. Yeah, certainly. So one thing for sure is that I would have a scribe with me. And I've already spoken with my administrative assistant, Hadley, about that. The very next morning, the first thing I said to her, as soon as I walked through the door, I said, Hadley, if this happens again, I want you by my side the entire day, writing everything down. Every person I talk to, every decision I make, every idea we put out there, the time it happened, where it happened, who was in the room, and we're just going to document everything. That's a good practice for an after action review about, looking at what we were doing during the crisis. But then there's also things we can look at before the incident happened. What type of planning went into this housing unit move? Are there ways we could have done the housing unit move a little bit differently? We knew that this was going to be controversial. Like, we knew that this was going to be something where the inmates we're not going to want to go from unlocked cell doors to locked cell doors. So we have a couple of other housing units that we're going to have to move around in the future. So those are some things we're going to tackle possibly a little bit differently. But there's a number of things we do. We also had on staff several people who were crisis negotiators. They were never called up. I don't know why they were never called up. Like, I didn't even know we had them on staff. Other people knew about that, but they never stepped up, and they were also never called up. So their skill set should have been used, but it wasn't. So there's a number of things that we could have and should have done differently to make it even like a better run operation. But like I said, under the circumstances, we had the best possible outcome. There could have been things we did differently that were better, but the outcome probably couldn't have been better.
I was surprised when I talked to your press assistant today, John Darling, that no charges have been brought. Is that typical? Does it take a few weeks to sort out? I know there were 13 inmates in one unit and 3 in another unit, 17 in one unit and 3 in another unit. When can we expect charges to be brought?
It's going to take a couple of weeks, just like I said. So probably any day now, maybe sometime next week. There's a lot of hours of footage of video that need to be reviewed by Special Investigation Unit, SIU, and they're in the process of doing that. But they have to create a full package and then present that to the district attorney. So it's not that we're not going to do it. We're going to do it. We're just taking our time doing it right, because when we present something to the DA, we want to make sure it's bulletproof and there aren't any holes in it. So there's very methodical. They're doing their jobs the right way. They're not rushing anything.
I want to say, if you're watching along the chat live tonight, you're free to text us in a question and we'll pass it on to the sheriff. So it's not just my perspectives that you're hearing. Sheriff, you had expressed some hope that now that we've had this incident, the state legislature and the governor might understand a little better the need for reconfiguring some of the units at Bristol County House of Correction. At your press conference, you raised the issue of the fact that roughly half the cells don't have toilets in them, and so that by court order they cannot be locked, and that in a disturbance situation lends to a less than optimum scenario. What kind of reception have you received from the legislators and the governor's office, if any, so far, about going more quickly to address these issues?
It's been very positive. So as you noted, we have, about half of our cells don't have toilets in them, and therefore we can't put locks on those cell doors. We have 21 housing units. 11 of them don't have any locks on the cell doors. The entire women's center, which has 4 housing units, they don't have any locks on the doors in any of those. Inside the cells, the housing units are locked from one another, but not within this housing unit. But the legislature has been very supportive. The legislature, and the governor, I've spoken with the governor a couple of times through text message, and I've also spoken with the Secretary of Public Safety. I think we have their attention. I think they get it. I think they understand that this is something that is not a luxury, it's a necessity in a place like jail. And I think they also see that the consequence of not doing this and doing it right away. We have to do everything through DCAM, Division of Capital Asset Management. It's one of the state agencies that oversees like state property, like bricks and mortar type of things, like a jail or a prison. So we'll have to work closely with DCAM to get that done. But each housing unit is going to cost about $500,000, $500,000 just to put the toilets in those. And then we have to put the locks on the doors, and that's a little extra money to do that as well. So it's not going to be a cheap project, but it is a necessary project. Let me just quickly paint a picture. The third shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., third shift, you have 50, sometimes 70, sometimes 90 inmates, in one place, in one housing unit with one correctional officer, and none of those cell doors lock. And so you're basically, you have a kind of a social contract with the inmates where the correctional officers get to know the inmates well and develop a relationship with them of respect and, dignity. And that's what helps keep the inmates from assaulting the correctional officers. Now, sometimes that does happen, but imagine this scenario though, you're in the middle of the night and you've got 70, 80 inmates and one correctional officer, and nothing between them. So that's, you really should have a situation where all of the cell doors lock. I mean, it's a jail. Like you kind of expect that to be the case, but it's not. So it was one of the most bizarre things I ever saw when I first visited there in December. And then when I started in January, I immediately came up with a plan with the maintenance director and a funding mechanism to put toilets in cells and then locks on doors for at least 2, maybe 3 housing units. But that's, we still have 11 total that we need to address.
So now that the disturbance has been resolved, have you continued to move inmates away so you can take these measures that you're doing to reduce the suicide rate in Bristol County? Have you continued on with that process of, removing the inmates so that I think it's the new arrivals that need to be more of in a group setting?
Yeah, so the new arrivals, putting them in a group setting was one of the first things we did. And we started moving inmates on Tuesday, and it was finally on Friday morning that things erupted. But one of the things that we haven't really talked much about was that this event was actually planned by the inmates. The Special Investigation Unit has video cameras all over the housing units, and normally we're watching the beehive buzz, but looking at things Thursday night and Friday morning, the beehive was buzzing a little bit differently. And when certain inmates normally would sleep in, they were awake that morning. Other inmates that were, the agitators, they all had their shoes on. They were ready, to rumble. They were ready for something. And I've spoke with all 4 correctional officers who were on the housing unit, and all 4 have told me what happened. A couple of them, 2 or 3 of them, have mentioned that inmates actually said to them, "Hey, what's happening? What's about to happen. It's not personal. It's just we have to stand up for ourselves." The inmates were saying that they just didn't want to move there was no standing up for yourself. If you move to a different housing unit, you don't have a say in the matter. Those inmates who didn't want to get moved out of their housing unit, well, we moved them out of the county, so that didn't go so well for them.
Yeah, you get what you sow, I guess. I can see your dog, I forget her name, has joined us.
Sashi. Yeah, it's
So,
Sashi.
Sashi, welcome, Sashi. We're glad to have you on the chat. Sheriff, you've moved quickly in your first 100 days. To do a lot of things. I don't know why. Hey, Sashi, how are you?
Here she is.
A good photo of her. She's a Japanese. What's her breed again?
Breed goes Shikoku Inu or Kochiken. So I just call her little Japanese wolf dog because she looks like that.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. I've seen her in person. She's a great dog. So I was saying, Sheriff, you've moved fairly quickly in your first 100 days. I don't know why I should be surprised about that, because I guess because sometimes politicians get in and they do take more time. And I'm not saying you haven't been deliberative, because I think you have, but talk about some of the things that you've already initiated: the suicide study, the Ash Street jail closure, the elimination of some programs.
Yeah, well, let me tell you about why I moved quickly. Former mayor of New Bedford, John Bullard, said it best: mayors get things done. He's a former mayor himself of New Bedford. When you're mayor, and I used to be mayor of Attleboro, as you know, when you're mayor and somebody contacts you with a complaint about a pothole or a street light out or trash not getting picked up, if you don't respond and you don't get things done, people notice and they protest. I mean, the mayors are really, really close to the people, especially in a small city like Attleboro, 47,000 people. So I came in with that attitude of, we have to get things done. And one of the first things was hiring a consultant to review our suicides. And, we now have a 65-page report, and we're implementing those changes that he is suggesting. All of them are reasonable. All of them make sense. So yeah, it's just there are some things that are going to take several years to accomplish. Like retrofitting the housing units, that's going to take several years to accomplish. Once we retrofit those housing units, put toilets and cells and locks on doors, then we can bring those inmates back from Ash Street, and then we can close Ash Street. So there's some large scale projects that we have to start right away.
Now, many of the officers that you're working with were under the old regime. That's who they worked for. But the old regime took the position that, well, suicide is just something that happens, and we try to have the most professional. We're doing everything we can, and there really isn't much more that we can do. Clearly, your consultant has identified some other things you can do, whether they're the bunk beds or the group setting when they arrive. Have you had any trouble getting buy-in from the corrections officers to do things a little differently with suicide watches?
Not with suicide. There's a saying, it's pretty common in a lot of places, but especially in corrections. We hate the way things are, but we hate change. So it's kind of, you kind of damned if you do, damned
Sort
if
of
you
in every
don't.
profession, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it's especially in law enforcement corrections, it's sort of a conservative atmosphere and a conservative mindset, and people are always worried about changes might impact negatively impact security. So everything we do very cautiously. I never make decisions alone. But with respect to suicide, I don't think there's too much of a resistance to do some of the changes surrounding that. But what you had said earlier was spot on. My predecessor had the attitude of everything we're doing is following policy and procedure. We're doing policy and procedure exactly the way we're supposed to. And he was right. They were. The problem is the policies and therefore procedures were insufficient. They were flawed. And so if you just follow just exactly what the policy says, then you're good. You're in from that point of view, you're not making any mistakes. So what Lindsay Hayes did was he looked at our intake policies and procedures, among a lot of other things, and he said, here is where you can be better. And he gave us 23 specific recommendations. So if anybody who said, hey, there's nothing we can do, we're doing everything right, there are 23 specific things that we could have done better. And the 24th, because it was a list of 24, the 24th was for me to form a task force to implement those first 23. But the staff, some staff like me, some staff don't like me, some staff, but everybody's there to do a job. And that's the important thing. And that, that they're professionals. And so I won the election. And I've earned the respect of a lot of people, but maybe not everyone. And so there's still things I have to do to change the organization for the better, to show that, I belong there, that the people were right to have selected me. And that's going to take time.
Yeah. What about the closure of the Ash Street jail? The previous sheriff on.
I think I lost you for a second. Okay.
And you did a study on that too, I guess, is that it was just not cost effective to run that antiquated building, that bigger building for 100 inmates. How much do you expect to save, and how quickly can we expect to see Ash Street closed?
Yeah, so for probably about 5 or 10 seconds, you were frozen, so I didn't hear anything, but I did catch, I think I got the idea though, is what about Ash Street? And like the last part I caught, which was, what are you going to do? I didn't campaign on closing Ash Street because I didn't know what was involved with closing Ash Street. I didn't know what I didn't know. And so I knew not to make promises. But as soon as I arrived, I thought of a way we could close it. We could retrofit the ice. I've come up with 3 different ways to close Ash Street in 3 months. And so just a little bit of creativity and a little bit of caring and make it a priority, and you can come up with ways. The first way, which is I'm not going to pursue, we could take the ICE detention center and turn that into single housing units, like single cells, and we could move those Ash Street inmates over there. Okay, that's one way to do it. We're not going to do that. It's actually pretty expensive to do that. We're going to turn the ICE detention center into a training academy. The second way is to take the GC housing unit, which is the big gymnasium, and retrofit that for individual housing, like individual cells, and bring those inmates over from Ash Street. We're also not going to do that. We're now using GC as the new admissions. The third way is to just put toilets and cells and locks on doors for the existing housing units. We don't have to build anything new. We're just putting toilets and cells and locks on doors. Whereas the previous 2 options would have to build new cells, new construction. And so, but this third way, we just put those toilets and cells and locks on doors, and then we can bring the inmates back from Ash Street. There's also the regionals, but we have a separate plan for them, but there's a much smaller, easier problem. Once we do that, though, we're closing 200,000 square feet of space that we need to heat, pay for electricity, water, maintain. We would then also bring the roughly 50 correctional officers back from Ash Street to Dartmouth, and there will be some attrition, I've been told, maybe there will be some, but still that's like a graduating a very large class into Dartmouth. It would make it a lot more like staff rich, so we're not forcing as much overtime. We'd have to open up a couple extra housing units, we get that, but overall it'll be a big net win, just the efficiencies. Inmates will have a lot more like programming available. Inmates can only get about 14 hours of programming per week at Ash Street, whereas at Dartmouth you get about over 40 hours per day. So it's better for inmate and reentry. So we're not paying to maintain it. We have more CO. Plan. And like I said, I've come up with 3 different ways to close Ash Street in 3 months.
So your signal is also cutting in and out, so I'm not sure what's going on here, but it's this is like the 3rd time it's done that, so hopefully we can get it to be a little more stable. Right now it's flashing. I'm getting a flashing photo on and off, so I don't know if that's fixable or not.
Oh yeah, I see what you're saying with the flashing photo. I don't know why it's doing that. You're normal from my point of view. There's no flashing.
Are you on your iPad or your computer?
No, desktop computer. It's a landline. There's no Wi-Fi.
Yeah. Okay. So the previous sheriff had mentioned that well, it looks like
I turned off the video, and I turned it back on. Hopefully that worked. It looks like it did.
Okay, so the previous sheriff had also said that he liked the idea of keeping Ash Street open because the building was over 100 years old. It's kind of looked like a dungeon. It was kind of scary, and he liked the idea of having that, the inmates being afraid to go there. What do you think of that argument?
It's the complete opposite. I don't know what he's talking about. A lot of inmates love going to Ash Street. They get a single cell. You don't have a roommate. And if this correctional officers, they actually like working at Ash Street because it's just a much calmer atmosphere than it is at Dartmouth. So a lot of people that are inmates, they'll put in that they have enemy issues or gang issues that are necessarily true, just so they can get put over at Ash Street. So Ash Street, as it turns out, is a pretty desirable place to be. It is old. Aside from that, let's just say the inmates didn't like it, they do like it, they're mixed, whatever it is. It's not adequate for modern correctional purposes. We're offering 14 hours of programming per week at that location versus over 40 hours per day in Dartmouth. So just from the programming point of view, it's counterproductive to have people at Ash Street because you want them participating in programming. And the idea that you're going to put somebody in this dungeon-like atmosphere is sort of sadistic, but that's kind of moot anyway, because a lot of the inmates, they actually prefer to be there. If I was locked up, I probably would want to be at Ash Street because I know I'd have a single cell. I wouldn't be sharing it with anybody. And that's actually, me personally, I would prefer that.
What about the programs that you've eliminated? The senior check-in program, some of the other programs, there's no value to those programs at all?
I never said there was no value to those. I've always said they don't have anything to do with running a jail, and I'm not going to do anything unless it has to do with running a jail. I'm really trying to focus on just running the jail. The Sheriff Hodgson has every right to pursue other policy areas and other endeavors outside of running a jail. As a politician can pursue whatever policy they want, and I'm not going to second guess that. I'm not going to question his authority to do that or any other sheriff's authority to do that. That's their right, and that's what their conscience drives them to. I would appreciate the same courtesy. as a politician, as an elected official, I have a duty and an obligation to pursue exactly what I campaigned on. And I campaigned on running a jail. I've taken almost $2 million of resources diverted outside of the jail, and I'm bringing them back inside the jail to do things that have to do with running a jail. That was about $2 million out of a $57 million budget. It's going up to over 60 million now, but that's $2 million not being spent on the jail, that if now that we're redirecting them, we're making for a better jail operation. And so that's a win for the jail. Now, if someday in the future, I, have the jail where I want it to be, it's going to take years to get it there. But if if I finally get that to a place where I, really want it to be, then maybe then I can pursue some of those outside endeavors. But I've never said they were, like one letter to the editor said, oh, Paul said, the Sheriff Heroux said they were wasteful spending. I never said that. It's beyond the scope of running a jail. I've never said they're useless. I've just said it's beyond the scope of running a jail, and I just want to focus on that.
Okay. So is the job what you expected? What were the biggest surprises in your first days in office?
I had twice as many lawsuits to address as I thought. Public records requests had showed there were 8 lawsuits. As it turns out, there were 16 unresolved lawsuits. Some of these were avoidable. Personnel issues. We didn't have a personnel department. We had one person who was running HR. There was, like I said, $2 million worth of salaries that were being spent outside of the jail that now I'm bringing those back inside the jail. There was, just stuff like that. There was a lot of, I don't punch backwards, but a lot of what the public knew about was really just the window dressing, the high profile stuff. Let's send inmates to build a border wall. We have a crisis at the ICE detention center, which I also don't call that a riot. I've seen all 30 videos. What happened in May of 2020 was not a riot. But it was like that stuff was the high profile stuff. The more mundane, routine, administrative issues of running a jail, just like you're running a city, those were the things. There was a lot more of that needed to be addressed than I think anybody knew about.
So I want to apologize to our viewers. We do continue to have periods where either the sheriff or I freeze up. I'm not sure why. We haven't had these problems before on the chat. Usually the internet connection is pretty stable, but for some reason we're having them tonight. I want to remind you that you can call in, write in for a chat question if you want. Sheriff, you've had some praise for the corrections officers, not just at the disturbance 2 weeks ago, but during the ICE riot. Sounds like you're impressed with the level of performance so far.
Yeah, but I wouldn't call it a nice riot, though. It was not a riot. I've seen the videos. The inmates were just standing around. A handful of them destroyed some property, but it was not. There have been 4 major incidents. 2 of them, I would say, were riots. In 1993 under Sheriff Nelson, the 2001 under Hodgson, I would say those were riots. Even though in corrections we're not supposed to use the word riot, I would qualify. What happened in ICE of 2020 and then what happened on April 21st, those weren't riots. So when you see the video footage of the inmates, they're just standing around. It's not. But the COs themselves, they're professional. They do a job. They do what they're supposed to do. And I think everybody wants to go in, just do 40 hours a week. They're burnt out. They've got a really tough job. They're assaulted on a regular basis. And it's, but they're good people though, they are. And, there's always the situation where you have some people who are, who probably don't belong in an organization, working there. And eventually those people weed themselves out, but I'm fortunate to have a good staff. I mean, Sheriff Hodgson always praised the staff, and rightly so. It's a good staff.
So I've recently had a communication from MCOFU, the Massachusetts Correctional Officers Union, about, I don't know whether they're in contract negotiations, about Bristol County COs being underpaid compared to other COs. What's your position on that? Are you involved in the negotiations? I know the state mainly pays for your budget. So who's doing that negotiating, and what is your role in that, if any?
We just got the parameters from the state I think last week, or maybe it was earlier this week. They just came out within the last 5 business days anyway. And now that we have those parameters, we can engage in negotiations. The state sets parameters that we can't exceed. There was a period, I think it was about 9 years, where the COs didn't take a pay raise, but the administration and the union were pointing their fingers back and forth at each other. They both blame each other for that 9 years. I think it was 9 years of no pay increases. So it is true that our correctional officers at the top step are some of the lowest in the state. Certainly the lieutenants are the lowest in the state. I know that's certainly true, but they are among the lowest. I have a couple ideas that I've floated to the union and that we're looking at to see if I can do legally. One of them is to do what we wish the state had already done. We collectively wish the state had pay parity for all of the correctional officers. So regardless of where you work as a state trooper or where you work as a parole officer, you're paid, or you're paid the same. The same thing with a state representative. You're paid the same wherever you live. Then you get different stipends on travel distance to the state house and committee assignments as a state rep. That's different. So there's pay parity among other state employee positions. With the jails, the 14 county jails, there's not pay parity. So one of the things that the ideas I came up with is, and I have to see if I'm legally allowed to do this, but is to offer a parity stipend where we would then say, okay, we're going to peg the salaries to either the average of the COs across the state or the highest of the surrounding counties or whatever it is. Maybe we peg them to the state police. Who knows? That way we don't lose them out to state police anymore. And then once we find out this is what they're making, then we offer a stipend to close the gap. So I can be creative like that. And I think I can do that. And once I do that, I think other jails are going to do that. And once the dominoes start to fall, the state is going to probably step in and say, you know what? This is something we have to address ourselves, so that way everybody's on the same playing field and people aren't getting different stipends. But I am very I'm like completely involved with that. They're usually headed up by the chief of staff. In my case, it'll be the chief of staff and the budget director. I will take the lead on those, but then they always check with me to see if what it is that they are doing, is okay. They explain to me the financial impact and then the personnel issues. But yeah, I mean, every step of the way I'm involved.
So am I understanding correctly? It is your office that does the negotiating with the union for this contract?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I want to ask a question that's a little bit delicate. And I wrote about it in my call recently, the second guessing of the former sheriff. I sort of have mixed feelings about that because I think he does have his right to his opinion, but I also think it's very early on in your tenure and he ought to give you a chance to run your own ship, so to speak. But my question is, you are running a paramilitary operation, and that's a special type of operation where loyalty is really paramount. And have you encountered any divided loyalties? Because he was a very strong personality. He had a very different corrections philosophy than your own. So are you encountering any issues of divided loyalty at the House of Correction?
Well, you mentioned two things here. The first one was his review of me and the performance I'm doing, and that's the first issue you mentioned. The second issue is the loyalty issue, and whether or not people. So to the first point, last week I was at the Mass Sheriff's Association monthly meeting with the other 13 sheriffs. There's 14 of us all together. Every single one of them thought it was inappropriate to, kind of second guess my performance or to critique my performance. When I was mayor, the previous mayor, Kevin Dumas, who I defeated, he never spoke ill of my performance. If you look at presidents, but for Donald Trump, presidents never criticize. It's the most high profile example. Presidents never criticize their successors, and somebody who came first doesn't punch backwards at with the exception of Donald Trump. He's kind of turned everything upside down. But all the other 13 sheriffs, including the other Republican sheriffs, all thought it was kind of inappropriate. It's not a normal protocol or practice to criticize your successor. The public doesn't like to see that, but more practically speaking, he wasn't there. he hasn't seen any of the video footage of, the incident. We haven't released any of the video footage yet, but when people finally see it, they'll see that it was not a riot. People were just kind of standing around. So, putting that aside, as far as the divided loyalties, there are some people who, who don't like me. And I'm okay with that. I'm never going to make everybody happy. It's impossible. A lot of voters didn't vote for me. My job is to make sure everybody else is doing their job properly. And as long as everybody's doing the job the way they're supposed to, and they follow instructions and they adapt to the changes and don't undermine those changes, I'm okay with it if they don't like me. I'm a Democrat. Some people just don't like me because I've got that D in front of my name. And it goes both ways. Some people didn't like Tom just because he was a Republican. Other people didn't like him because of his policies. And that'll be the same thing with me.
But specifically, what about the question of divided loyalties in a paramilitary organization?
I haven't come across any divided loyalties. If I found out that somebody was leaking stuff to Tom, I would address it, or to, the Republican State Committee, I would address that. I'm not really sure the degree to which that would be addressed, because it's kind of a hypothetical. If some things are a matter of public knowledge and public record, and so those they're just running their mouths, and there's nothing that can be done about that. But if somebody's actively undermining, that is a real serious offense, and to the degree to which it's going on, will determine the type of discipline. My job is not to come in heavy-handed. My job is to come in with things I want to do, explain those things to the staff. One of the things I do is every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, maybe once a week, rarely once a week, but probably every 2 or 3 weeks, I'll send out an email to all users, every employee, saying, hey, here are the things that we've been working on. And I talk about those things in advance, so that way people know what it is I'm working on. Because in the absence of them knowing, they're just going to make stuff up. They're going to assume the worst. They're going to make rumors will rule. And so that's a practice that had not been done in the past, that level of transparency with the staff and just explaining. And I'm talking everybody, from the people who clean the trash barrels all the way, everybody gets the same email. And I send those out on a regular basis just to give people an update. So I won the election, and I have, the respect of a lot of people, but I still have to earn the respect of other people.
Recidivism was a big issue during the campaign. What steps have you taken to improve the high rate of recidivism in Bristol County, and what are your hopes in that area?
Well, the first thing is we have to measure it. That's the first thing we have to do. Then we have a baseline, and the measuring of the recidivism for the entire jail, but then is looking at the specific programs. And those are two different types of approaches. One of them is descriptive statistic, which is just describing the population. The other one's an analytical statistic, which is a lot more complicated. And that's where you have a treatment group and a control group, and you see if there's an effect size. That's a lot more of a complicated thing to do. To answer your question, though, I've already had several meetings on collecting the data, because we have to first say, okay, this is the data I need to do a recidivism study on what just describing what the population looks like. We've already started doing that. Once I have that in place, that data will then kind of lay the groundwork for doing the second question, is to look at whether or not our programs work. And when a lot of jail and prison administrators look at recidivism, whether or not the programs work, they always look at the population who's getting a program, but they never look to the population not getting the program, and in the same population. So there's no difference between the two groups. You would say, well, why do I care about the people who aren't participating in that program? How does that tell me if the program works? If they're not in the program, you need a control group. You need a comparison. So you're comparing apples to apples, not apples to oranges. And so that way you can say, okay, these two groups are the same. It's just this one got the program, this one didn't. And that's a lot more of a complicated process. But it can be done. It will be done.
Is there any specific program that you started yet, or is that to come?
Well, one of the ones that we started talking about was the medically assisted treatment program that's for drug addicts. It's called MAT or MOOD. It's kind of used interchangeably. That one we're going to probably have a pretty rigorous scientific design. And by that, there's different levels of research design. You've got like a randomized experiment. That's a little bit tougher to do in a correctional setting because then you're withholding treatment from people, unless you have so many people that you can't accommodate, and then you can randomly assign. The next lower level of research design is a quasi-experimental design, which is where you can use wait lists. That actually is sort of like an experimental design. So we're going to be doing that type of experimental design. Then you've got like another level down, which is like advanced regression. But then you have a couple other types of research design, which we're not going to do, which is like pre-test, post-test, or correlation. That doesn't tell us anything. So the MAT program and the MOOD program, we've already had the conversations about looking at that and measuring it, with a level 4, that quasi-experimental design, which would be a research design rigorous enough to stand up to probably be published in an academic journal. So a lot of the stuff that's done in correctional facilities, they just look at the program, they get a rate of recidivism, they compare it to the general population, they say, oh, it's lower, so therefore it works. That's not the right way to do it. That's like a level 1 research design. That's the lowest level. Other people do interviews with inmates and say, the inmates say the program works, and you can see the staff. The staff are happy with the way the program works. You have good that's like anecdotal. That's below level 1. So there's different. So to answer your question, though, the first one we've looked at is that medically assisted treatment program for drug users. One of the things I also need to do is roll out the reorg of the inmate services and hire the director of inmate services to oversee all the programs, because then once the programs, we have to collect the data in order to measure things. So it's a process. We're going to do it. I'm not saying we can't do it. We're going to do it. But it's to do it right. You're not going to do it quickly. It takes a couple of years, several years to do. The general recidivism study, that once I have the data, I can crank that out in a few months myself. But that's just a descriptive statistic of the population, not an analytical of the programs. Those are different, just to be clear.
I think a lot of people are going to be very anxious to hear about how those programs work, how the follow-up works, how counseling or medical treatment or whatever it is, work training, whatever it is that you're going to be using works, because it seems, I remember talking to one of the talk radio callers when I was filling in one night, and I said to her, it's a house of corrections, not a house of punishment.
Mm-hmm.
They're saying they're there to be punished, and which is odd because it's a pretrial, largely a pretrial facility anyway, and it's not a house of punishment, it's a house of corrections. I want to ask about City Councilor Naomi Carney. She's been a long-time city councilor. I know this is a
Oh, I just lost you. I don't know if you can still hear me, but I heard you say Naomi Carney. So open this back up.
For a long time. That program had initially been criticized when it had some chain gang elements to it. It hasn't had those elements for many years. You decided to continue the program, but Councilor Carney eventually lost her job and did not succeed in obtaining any other jobs at Bristol. Can you talk a little bit about the situation there? And I just want to ask, have you found that patronage is a problem at the jail at all? I don't want to say that Councilor Carney's position was patronage, but I have the sense that this was a political operation in some senses. Maybe I'm wrong, but what is your take on hires and why Councilor Carney had been there for a long time and now she's gone?
Yeah, there are a number of positions that were really not necessary. They were redundant and they could be done. It's across the board. And I'm trying to clean this up a lot. You have a lot of positions that are doing 2 different jobs and they're completely different and they report to 2 different people. And you can't have one person reporting to 2 different people. That's one situation going on. Other times you've got some people who don't have 40 hours of work per week, but they're being paid 40 hours of work per week. And so there's some positions like that are redundant. We do have some patronage positions. Absolutely. There were people who were given jobs that were not necessary. Now, I am not saying that Naomi Carney was one of those people that was given a position and for patronage purposes. I don't believe that to be the case. I really don't. But the position itself was redundant. It could, her responsibilities could have and more absorbed by a captain, or right now with the captain position is vacant, so that's being done by the colonel, but it wasn't a necessary position. And so, that's why I got rid of the position. Miss Carney didn't do anything wrong. She did nothing wrong, and she wanted to continue working. But, I'm not allowed to talk about personnel issues. And, but there was, like I said, she didn't do anything wrong. If she wanted to apply for other jobs at the Bristol County Sheriff's Office, BCSO, she would be certainly welcome to apply to those, and she'll be treated like anyone else, and get a job based on her merits and how well she does in the interview. But just to be clear, I don't think her position was like it was like I'll fund this position to get this favor from this person who is a city council. I don't think that's the case, but there are definitely positions that are they're redundant. Yeah.
Well, whatever patronage positions may exist there, I hope you get rid of them, and the redundant positions, that seems like a no-brainer. Also, I have a question coming in from David Aaron's, and he's asking, and this question was on my own list itself. Have you begun to look into things like healthcare, food service, phone practices, the commissary, vendors, things like that? I know when I was at the Standard Times, we did a big investigation on food, and the conclusion was that the food was adequate in terms of calories and nutritional value, but very not fresh, not appetizing, not something that was it may meet minimum health standards, but certainly not optimum health standards. So can you talk about things like phone service, food service, inmate services in general?
Yeah. So I've tried the food. We'll start there. I'll talk about food. I'll talk about medical. Then I'll talk about inmate services writ large. I've tried the food, and imagine you are in elementary school and you go to the cafeteria and they give you some food from the cafeteria. You bring it home, you put it in your fridge overnight, and then you reheat it the next day. That's kind of what the food's like. It's not disgusting. It's not. I mean, it's just it's certainly not restaurant quality food. It's mass produced. It's and we have to be so but I've tried it. And as far as medical goes, I think that every nurse and doctor are trying to do a good job. They're trying to provide good medical care. Now, inmate services writ large, just so you have food, you have medical, you've got different programs. There's a lot of different things. I'm going to be hiring a director of inmate services, one person to oversee all of those different operations, the reentry, the housing, healthcare, and a job that I've talked about and during the election, I'm still pursuing now, the different programs, education, vocational training. One person is going to oversee all that. And then as a director level, then there's going to be deputy directors, then coordinators, then you have your staff. So I'm reorganizing all of that. I have made up my mind. I am going out to bid for some services, that I'm not, I shouldn't say right now which ones those are or which one it is. If there's one or many, I'm not going to say that, but it would not be appropriate for me to disclose that right now and then have a vendor hear about that through the grapevine and I release it, in a forum like this. It just wouldn't be, it wouldn't be a professional way to go about it, but we will be going out to bid, and maybe the vendor or vendors are going to be the best bid. That's a possibility, but that is something I will be doing. When I was mayor in Attleboro, we had an insurance carrier. It was Richardson Cuddy, and they happened to be located in Attleboro. And we went out to bid, and we hadn't been out to bid in probably 20 years or so, maybe even longer. And Attleboro had just, kept using Richardson Cuddy. So when we went out to bid, the bids came back, and Richardson Cuddy came in with a new quote of, it's like almost like $1 million less than what it was previously. And so we ended up staying with Richards and Cuddy. We ended up staying with them as, you know, the insurance vendor for the city. And, you know, glad we did. And we ended up getting a little bit better of a rate. And so I don't know if that's going to happen here, if we get a better proposal, because we'll be submitting, you know, doing an RFP, request for proposals. So time will tell.
So Carly Beck is asking the same type of question as David on inmate services. Are we likely to see, because really inmate services are at the core of what Bristol County for Correctional Justice was objecting to about the conditions at Bristol County Jail. They just weren't humane in their opinion. What about phone prices and canteen prices? Any changes there that we can look forward to?
Yeah, the phone issue is, we're waiting for the dust to settle on what the state legislature is doing, because that's something that the state is going to be, it looks like they're going to be subsidizing, if not outright providing free phone calls. But then there's a little bit of some working to do on the degree, how many minutes does an inmate get per day or per week, because if it's just set by the state, that's going to cause problems at the 14 jails and the one DOC, because we're the ones closest to the inmates. So if that's set by the state legislature, or if it's set by EOPS, even with input from the DOC, the Department of Correction is dealing with inmates who are sentenced, you know, for felonies, which are more than 2.5 years. We have awaiting trial and misdemeanors, which is less than 2.5 years, except for awaiting trial that's going on for years and years, which happens. So hope that'll be, but aside from that, then we have the canteen prices. Now, canteen, any profit we make on canteen is that profit has to go back to the inmates. We have to spend that money on inmates. And you know, that's one of the things that I've only been there for, just like we said, just over 100 days. I haven't had a chance to delve too much into the canteen issue. I've just learned a little bit about it, but that's not, you know, Keefe is our canteen vendor, and you know, they are, you know, it's one of those things that, you know, when I get on board, I'll have to look a little more closely with you know, the director of inmate services.
Sheriff, are you there?
I'm here. Looks like you we had another hiccup with our connectivity.
That one, for a minute, we both fall off. So I'll just ask you if you can repeat, if you will, maybe the last 2 minutes of what you were talking about.
Yeah, so I'll try and even do it even a little more quicker than the so with the canteen prices, that's, you know, our vendor is Keefe, and all of the profit that we take in has to go to the inmates. With respect to the phone service, you know, that's something that the state legislature is taking on, and they're looking at doing like what's called no cost calls. You know, well, that's a cost somewhere. Somebody has to pay for it, but no cost to the inmate. And the reason for that is because, you know, if you, and I didn't say this earlier, so, but if you, phone calls to home are they facilitate reentry. If you block the phone calls to home, that's a barrier to reentry. So we have to make sure that we, you know, we're acting at just that right spot. So, but that's something that the legislature is going to be funding. And so the degree to which inmates are going to be paying for that going forward is, I just don't know. It's too early to say what's going to happen on that front.
I was interested during the disturbance a couple of weeks ago to learn that they had destroyed some TVs. I thought that Sheriff Hodgson had gotten rid of all the TVs years ago. I know the weightlifting was also an issue. What is the status currently at the jail of TVs and weightlifting and amenities like that?
Yeah, you know, when I did a tour of Ash Street and Dartmouth back in December, I was also surprised to see that there were TVs in the housing units. And there are TVs in the housing units, and they have been for a long time. I think what Sheriff Hodgson did was remove the TVs from the cells, the individual cells, so people can watch TV in a kind of a group setting, but not in their individual cells. One of the demands that the inmates had made was that we would have TVs in the cells, and I'm not going to go for that because I've just seen what they did to the TV that was in the housing unit, the communal TV, and they destroyed those. And so, no, I'm not going to give you TVs if you just destroyed your individual ones. It doesn't work like that. So Yeah, it's as far as weights go, I don't think we have any weights, but there is recreation time. There is recreation time. People can play basketball. They can do laps around at different areas outside. So there is recreation time. There's a lot of jails and prisons have weights, and weights cut both ways. Weights can be good for people's health, but they can also be turned into a weapon. But how much of a weapon is it? Well, I think almost anything can be turned into a weapon. I mean, inmates, they're very creative. They can turn a lot of things into weapons.
What about is there a reward structure for inmates who try to take advantage of whatever educational or vocational training amenities that are offered at the jail? Are there things like that are offered, and is there any sort of incentive to have inmates being educated or learning skills? Is there any opportunity for that?
Well, there's opportunity for education and skills, vocational training, and all sorts of programs. There's a lot of opportunity for that. The programs were, this is one of the criticisms I have of the current operation, which I'm going to be changing. You have one person kind of doing everything, and you got multiple people like that. So, but that's not really what you were asking about. But the as far as like rewards, we don't get to release people early based on how they act within jail. Like I don't get to, when I have to follow what's on the minimus, and that's what the court sends to us, and that says this is their admission date, this is the release date, and they're going to be with you for that duration of time. There is some debate about whether or not we can do like a house arrest with people, but have people put an electronic bracelet on them, and there is some debate about that, but that's a long process that we're not prepared to do. Certainly not right now. We have too many things going on. Maybe in the future I can entertain that and see the degree to which it can be done. But if somebody is behaving themselves and functioning well inside the jail, then that's something that we can look at with classification. Classification can then say, okay, maybe you get a less restrictive housing unit, so there's that type of reward.
Mm-hmm. Just very quickly, because we're wrapping up pretty soon, have you had any so I had talked to you previously, and you had said that when the Ash Street closes, the holding cells for New Bedford, which doesn't have any holding cells, will be like the other communities in Bristol County that don't have holding cells, and they would be held at the Dartmouth facility. You're comfortable with that? That will work well with the city as large as New Bedford?
Oh yeah, it'll be fine. We have 20 cities and towns all over Bristol County. Attleboro has its own holding cells, so Attleboro never had to use the regional lockups down here in Dartmouth. Actually, I'm in Attleboro right now. But having the regional lockup for the inmates, they're not really inmates. They're detained. They're being detained, until they have their trial. Anywhere from maybe 12 hours, 18 hours, maybe as much as 72 hours. Those folks, we'll have them on Dartmouth. So whether or not somebody is going to be awaiting like a regional lockup in Dartmouth or 10 minutes away in New Bedford or vice versa, it's a 10-minute drive. It doesn't really change anything. The operation is still exactly going to be the same. It's just, it'll be easier for the other communities to get to the regional lockup, because the House of Correction, Dartmouth, is right off of 195. Very easy to get to right off 195. Ash Street, you have to go through neighborhoods to get there, and it's a little bit, which is not a big deal, but it's just less wasted time driving. I mean, it's not a more complicated issue. It's just less time. So what happens to Ash Street afterwards? That's between the mayor and the city council, the state reps, the state delegation. That'll be up to them. I wouldn't presume to say what the best use is of that building after it's no longer, under my jurisdiction. I'll leave that to the mayor and the city council and the state delegation. They can figure that out. I'll be busy running my jail.
Well, Sheriff, this hour has flown by. I still have about 10 questions that we're not going to get to, but I think an hour is enough for anybody, and you're generous to give us the whole hour. So we'll save them for next time. Is there anything I didn't ask you that is important to you that you'd like to get out in a message tonight?
Well, if you want to have me back on another time to ask those other 10 questions, you know who to set up with Jonathan Darling and Hadley in my office, and we can. We're happy to come back on whenever you want. But no, it was a good conversation, nice little chat, and so it's always nice to chat with you, Jack. Oh, looks like we froze up again. Yep. So did we freeze up again?
Thanks very much for appearing in the chat.
Okay, thanks, Jack.